Greetings. I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about Chapter 8 on survey research. The topics that are covered in your chapter include survey research in the social sciences, questionnaire development and assessment, writing survey questions, organization of the questionnaire, survey designs, and ethical issues in survey research. Again, one of the major recommendations I make over and over again is to take a look at the literature out there and look at some popular surveys that are used in criminal justice. Yeah, you might want to take a look at some of the surveys that are on the National Institute of Justice website and look at how they are constructed. Survey research is very useful, and again, you're using all those ideas, concepts, sampling strategies, research designs. Everything that we've discussed comes into play here with survey research in terms of developing your survey. And I also would mention that it can be very useful to obtain permission to use a survey that has already been constructed and field tested and has been shown to be a reliable and valid survey instrument. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel unless you're going into a whole nother area where you don't have previous surveys to rely upon. But surveys are attractive because of the versatility, the efficiency, and the generalizability. Right now, whenever you mention, if you mention a survey to me, what I would think is that telephone that has been going off the hook with ringing because it's a big political season right now. And I would be getting maybe 2 or 3 calls in the evening from different research or survey companies wanting to ask me all kinds of questions about political candidates and different policies and my income and my gender, my age, and all these other demographics. And of course, trying to piece together who I plan to vote for. And sometimes I respond to the survey, the person that's conducting the survey, and sometimes I say no thank you. Sometimes I've asked them to remove me from their list and never ever call me again. A lot of it has to do with the surveyor's attitude and how they approach it. The other evening I did a long survey with a gentleman who obviously was just starting out, was being supervised, was very nervous, and I tried to be as friendly as I could in answering the questions. That same night I had someone call and was basically rude, and I don't know, it's kind of controlling, and that person I didn't want to discuss any issues related to politics. Many times you will construct a questionnaire or the survey instrument that has your questions for a self-administered survey. Other times you will have an interview schedule, such as those that are calling me at all times of the day and evening trying to interview me. And of course, an in-person interview schedule would be appropriate as well. The respondent is the person who responds or answers the questions on a survey, and the response rate is that very important percentage of people who people who receive the surveys who complete the surveys. So if I was to send out 1,000 surveys, let's say, and I get 100 back, I have a 10% response rate. And so basically the item response rate is the percentage of items that are completed on a survey. So that also is often in the analysis as well, that there are some questions that people just don't respond to, especially ones that are personal or controversial, or you have a lower response rate. There's a lot of ideas and recommendations in the chapter regarding questionnaire development and assessment. Um, Having clear questions, avoiding irrelevant ones. Again, building on successful surveys I've mentioned. Um, and you can have open-ended questions or closed-ended questions. An open-ended question would be, for example, um, what kind of drugs do you use? And then the person would list the drugs that they use, if any. A close-ended question basically asks for a specific response. Do you use drugs? Yes or no. And many surveys have a mix of open-ended and close-ended questions. A lot of the large-scale surveys I see, though, mostly close-ended questions, it seems. And I think that's just makes it easier to code. In fact, it's coded in the computer as one takes a survey online, for example. Try to avoid, or basically avoid, confusing phrases and vagueness. So make sure everything is clear and understandable, and avoid negatives and double negatives, and double-barreled questions, which is really asking two questions. I saw a survey recently, a community survey that I was sent, and it said, am I satisfied with the condition of the lakes and the canals? Yes or no? And I couldn't believe it. A double-barreled question in 2016. I believe it was 2015. But basically, and a lot of people say, well, canals, lakes. Well, I'm very satisfied with the canals, but the lakes I'm not satisfied with. So you kind of get the idea here. For example, I might ask, do you like chocolate, cheesecake, and key lime pie? Yes or no? Well, it seems like if you like one, you probably like the other, but not necessarily. So you want to avoid those. You want to avoid questions that kind of bias it toward agreement or disagreement one way or the other. And make sure that the response choices do not overlap. So having them be mutually exclusive is very important. Sometimes you see that with surveys. They'll ask, an age category, and there's actually overlap or overlap with the income, and so you could fall into two categories. You don't want that situation to occur. A lot of times a Likert type scale is used, and that's the strongly agree to the strongly disagree ranking. And there's also filter questions, skip patterns, and contingent questions that can be used, and this helps in moving through a survey efficiently. You can combine questions to develop indexes, and that gets a little more complex, but that's very useful if you're measuring a specific concept and seeing how that concept relates to other variables of interest. A lot of times we start our surveys with the demographic questions, gender, age, race, ethnicity, income, etc. And often demographic factors become important independent variables. For example, are there income differences in the community between men and women? Probably one of the most important things I would recommend if you're using the survey method is to pre-test the survey. In other words, administer the survey to a very small sample and take a close look to see what kind of problems exist with the survey. And that's very useful because you don't want those problems to be on the final product. So you want to go ahead and pre-test the survey. There's a section in your textbook talking about the organization of a questionnaire, and how it should look. And I think really the best thing there is just to take a look at all the examples of the very popular questionnaires that have been used before in criminal justice research that are reproduced in your textbook in the chapter. So I think that's relevant to look at. There's some information about constructing a cover letter, and then also a section on survey designs, mailed survey, group administered survey, phone survey, in-person survey, and electronic survey. And then there's a comparison of the costs and benefits and the different settings and types of administration. So you always want to think about that. I can tell you that I've done mailed self-administered surveys before, group administered surveys I've conducted. I don't recall ever conducting phone surveys, and I have also done in-person interviews as well as internet or electronic surveys. And a lot of times it depended on the situation I was involved with. For example, when I was running treatment groups, I used group administered surveys or interviews, in-person interviews. When I conducted a survey on unusual sexual practices, I used the mailed self-administered surveys, and there was not any way that I would know who filled out the survey unless they put they had a self-addressed stamped envelope to my P.O. box. The only way would be is if they wrote their name on the survey, and I don't know why they do that, or for some bizarre reason they put their return address on the survey. But then I would take the survey out and I would shred the envelope, because I guaranteed that they would remain anonymous. There was really no way I would know who was filling out the survey. And there were some very sensitive questions there. When they were being distributed, I remember someone said, "How do I know I'm not the only one who's getting this survey, and then I send it back and you know who it is?" And I said, "Well, first of all, I don't know you, but I said, if you're really worried about that, let me give you a couple dozen and you can pass them out to your friends." And so we kind of used that snowball sampling scenario, and he took them. And so that actually worked out to my benefit. More recently, we see a lot more electronic or internet surveys. I conducted one with a nursing professor on nurse practitioner attitudes toward having a registered sex offender as a patient in their practice. And there's also mixed mode surveys, and then of course you can compare and contrast the different types of surveys. Often costs become very relevant. Oh, this was kind of exciting. Last year, I got surveyed by the Nielsen organization for television shows. It was interesting because one of the questions asked the programs that I watch, comedy, reality TV, drama, religious, news, soap operas. To me, there's not that some of those overlap. I don't know the difference between the soap opera, a reality TV show, a drama, a talk show, and the news. I can't tell the difference anymore. But nevertheless, this was really kind of neat, because a lot of times people say, "Well, I've never been called by Gallup poll. I've never, been, surveyed by," and so I actually have, and I actually filled out the survey and returned it, and now can say that I participated in the Nielsen survey. Ethical issues in survey research, protecting the respondents, also confidentiality, anonymity, and all this is real important. And especially you'll see, for example, in electronic surveys, the situation of tracking by internet address that can be a problem, or email. And so one has to minimize that as well. And so there's a lot of different features there. But to kind of wrap things up, what I'd like you to always think about if you're conducting a survey is basically, have you surveyed the appropriate population? And also, what is an acceptable margin of error that you're willing to accept? Think about that ahead of time as it relates to your study. Think about uh, what what sample size you need that would be appropriate, and think about the costs and the different types of administration of your survey, and also measurement error and also non-response error. Those are some of the big areas to really think about before you go out there and conduct your survey, to start thinking about those. Um, I did work for a major corporation for 6 months in their market research department, and that's all I did basically, were surveys. And some of the samples were huge, some were small, some were moderate. But again, it depends on your population of interest, and the type of information you're interested in obtaining, and of course, if the particular behavior is common or very rare, or somewhere in between, so that may direct how you conduct your research as well. But again, go out there and look at some top quality surveys to get some ideas. And this wraps up this video.